Hey everyone, this is Libertarian Black Man. I want to point out just how stupid Americans get when it comes to politics. And it goes something like this. A majority of America believes that we are headed in the wrong direction. This is a poll from February of 2019, 63% after the shutdown ended said that this country was headed in the wrong direction. It's easy to blame President Trump, being that he is the person he is and has done things that have been very unpopular. But it has nothing to do with Trump, because for the last several years we've seen a majority of the public say we're in the wrong direction regardless of who the president is. This poll comes out from 2011. 74% said the country was headed in the wrong direction under President Obama. In 2008, we also had 81% of the population say that we were headed in the wrong direction under President Bush, and we had a financial crisis which had everything to do with that number. But if you go back to the early 1970s, we have been saying that this country has been going in the wrong direction pretty much every single year. Majorities of Americans have been saying this under both Democratic and Republican presidents. It didn't matter. And if you just look at the history, this is a chart that shows percentages of Americans who say that things are going well in the United States. Only in 4 cases, 1, 2, 3, and 4, do you see about 2/3 or more of the country saying we're going in the right direction. Here in the mid-1980s, we had a booming economy. Here in the early 90s, we had just won the Cold War, and we won a war in the Middle East also. Here in the late 90s, we had a booming economy. Here in the early 2000s, we had just invaded Afghanistan and pushed the Taliban out of power. These are 4 cases out of 30-something cases over the past 40 years in which Americans have said we were going in the right direction. But pretty much throughout the entire history of the last 40 years, most Americans have been against the direction our country has been going in. And you would think that they would vote out the politicians who are in power and decide that they're going to put new people in. But this is where it gets stupid, because in fact we keep voting for the same people over and over again. This chart shows the U.S. Senate re-election rates going back to the mid-1960s, and as you can see, in all but one case, we've had 60% or more of senators retaining their seats. And even here in 1980, where we had less than 60%, it was still about 55% of senators who won re-election. During this entire period, most people say the country's going in the wrong direction, but they keep voting for the same people who take us in the wrong direction. If you add up the turnover rate of the U.S. Senate during this past 55 years, it's been 17%, meaning that 83% of senators are constantly getting re-elected, even though a majority of the people don't like the work that they're doing. For representatives in the House, it's even worse, because we have never seen less than 80% of members of the House get reelected. And the thing about the House of Representatives is that every single person is up for reelection every single election cycle. Unlike the Senate, where 2/3 of the Senate is not up for grabs in every election, you do have every single member of the House who is. And they win re-election at a rate of 93%. If you look at the chart over the past 55 years, even though a majority of Americans for this entire period say we're going in the wrong direction. So we have a turnover rate of only 7% for the House of Representatives. If you add it up, if you average the numbers up, we've had a turnover rate of only 12% over the past 55 years for our entire Congress, even though in almost every poll during that period, a majority of Americans, whether it's 60, 70, 80, or 90%, say that we are headed in the wrong direction. So this begs the question, how can a majority of Americans approve of their politicians and simultaneously disapprove of the direction those politicians are taking America? And the answer is in two words: ignorance, just flat out not knowing what people are voting for and what's going on in the country, and apathy, not caring enough to actually dig and find out what is going on with our representatives and with our with public policy. And this makes it even worse because we live in an age of easily accessible information through the internet and portable devices, and because we just don't care enough, Americans suffer a horrendous level of self-imposed ignorance about politics, government, and current events. Because we don't care enough, even though it's never been easier to find out who our representatives are, how they voted, how the economy works, what goes on when it comes to healthcare, education, housing policy, and so on, we do not know hardly anything. And here is how bad it is. In surveys conducted during the 2010s, 74% cannot name all three branches of government. That is 3/4 of the American population. If you were to ask them, name one branch of government or name all three branches of government, they would not be able to say legislative, executive, and judicial branch. If you ask 1/3 of those people, they would be so clueless as to not even know any single branch of government. A full third of Americans would say, well, I have no idea, I don't know. A branch of government? What's that? What's the government? What's a branch? I mean, they'll give you an answer like that and probably laugh because it's funny and almost cool to not know what's going on in government. It's truly a shame. Another third of the country cannot name the century of the American Revolution, which created America in the first place. For those who are in that third, it was the 18th century, the 1700s, in particular, the late 1700s. I do want to help you, but I think it's quite shameful that 1/3 of Americans don't know that. Another third, more than 1/3, 37% of Americans cannot name a single right protected under the First Amendment, of which there are 5, but one of them, which is the very first one, should jump out at you: freedom of speech. It should jump out at you. And then you have freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. I can better understand if people don't know freedom of assembly or petition, because those rights are not talked about much in the media. But freedom of the press, which is all the media is, and freedom of religion, especially with President Trump and his campaign talking about not letting Muslims in the country, this is something that should jump out at us. But whenever you see a protest, you should think freedom of speech, and yet 37% of Americans, if asked what rights are there in the First Amendment, just name one, they would draw a blank and not have any idea what to say. So we have 63% of people who cannot name their own congressman in the House of Representatives. 44% cannot name the party of their representative. 57% cannot name any Supreme Court justice. 77% of 18 to 34-year-olds cannot name any of their senators. And when it comes to Latinos, it's 84%. When it comes to blacks, it's 90%, which is really sad, because if there's any demographic group that needs to know who their representatives are, it's people of color who suffer most by the oppressive taxes and regulations of government. And here's a statistic for those who are thinking that our education needs to be improved. 50% nearly of college students don't even know how many years a congressman or senator serves. So we definitely have to get education fixed in America. And for many reasons, this should definitely be one of those reasons. Yet, this does not stop Americans from thinking they know so much more than they know. In one of the surveys taken, 89% of people responded believing that they could pass the test, and 83% failed when it came to these types of basic civics questions. So, We think we know so much more than we know. That's part of what makes us dumb. And what's even worse is that we continue to vote for what we do not like or what is not in our best interests. However, when it comes to the marketplace, Americans make much better decisions when it comes to the choice of goods and services they consume than they do when it comes to politics. So, for example, somebody sells you a product, you don't like it, it costs too much, the quality is not good. You choose not to buy it anymore. You go to an alternative, you go to a competitor and you buy from them. And then the business will either change its product to your liking or they will be out of the market. Because imagine if a business had a customer base in which a majority of customers were opposed to what they were putting out there. That business would not survive even a few months if they were to do that. And let me give you two examples of what I'm talking about. Over 30 years ago, some of you may be old enough to remember that Coca-Cola came out with a new formula to its product, calling it the New Coke, and it was a disaster. People did not like the flavor, they did not like the taste, many claiming it was too sweet, and this was all because Pepsi was coming on the market, gaining more market share and becoming more competitive to Coke. Coke said, we'll try to change our formula to be like Pepsi. Customers didn't like it, and they showed their dissatisfaction. Within weeks of Coca-Cola announcing it was changing the formula, the company was getting 5,000 angry phone calls per day. And this was in April of 1985. Only a few months later, we had 8,000 phone calls coming into Coca-Cola, and that cost the company money because they had to hire extra operators to deal with the volume. So, only 79 days after coming out with New Coke, the company said, we're going back to the old formula. And they apologized for the disaster that they had caused by changing the formula. So a perfect example of what happens when Americans get active, they create change. But this is a private company. And so with a private company, it depends on what product people are outraged about, but people will show their dissatisfaction, they will get involved, and they will make a change. Another example is something that happened only a few weeks ago. There was a store that sold Nike products out in Colorado and boycotted Nike after they picked Colin Kaepernick, the NFL quarterback, as a spokesperson because Colin Kaepernick was protesting the national anthem by kneeling when it was sung in the football game. They decided that they weren't going to sell Nike products anymore, and the store ended up closing a few months later because customers who were coming in to buy Nike stopped coming because the Nike products were taken off the shelves in protest. And the store owner said, basically, I'm unhappy with Colin Kaepernick and he's disrespecting the flag in our country and so on. But then at the bottom of his tweet, he says, we have a choice, we have a voice, and I am not choosing to be a Nike dealer anymore. So he made a stand for what he believed in. But you know what? His customers also made a stand. Stephen Curtis Martin, the owner of the store, found out the hard way that you cannot stay in the market if you do not serve people. So people came against him and shoved him out the market. And the thing that is amazing is that we don't do this when it comes to politics. When it comes to our Nikes and our Jordans and our Coca-Colas and our Pepsis, we will get active and we'll get out there and we'll make a change right away. But then when it comes to our healthcare and education and housing policy, we keep voting for the same politicians to take us in the wrong direction. We don't make a change. We just stick to the same terrible policies. And as long as we keep doing that, as long as we continue to stay stupid when it comes to politics, our country will continue to go in the wrong direction because we simply do not even know what we're voting for, which is why when we vote, we keep getting the same bad results. We don't have a clue what's going on, and we don't care enough to know what is going on. So Americans, please wise up, get smart, get informed, and get active when it comes to your elected officials. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Libertarian Black Man. Follow the Twitter page Libertarian Black Man, and we hope to see you in the next video.